Hi everyone, I'd like to talk to you about something that I feel very passionate about, finding balance. In a world full of extremes, where we're going on crash diets and doing extreme fitness or making quick life decisions and being bombarded with messages, the most critical thing we can do for ourselves is to strike a balance, to do a little bit of it all, to discover what we truly want in this world, and to get to a better version of ourselves. And there are a number of steps you can take to find balance in your life. First step really is to be gentle on yourself. We sometimes pressure ourselves more than anyone else. We're our worst critics. We say we have to be in a certain place in our life. I know I do it to myself all the time. Why don't I have this job? Why don't I push myself harder? Why don't I grow my base? All of the things. But when I'm gentle on myself and I take time and I love myself through that growth, I find that I'm at peace with the process and I'm just a nicer person to be around. When I'm pressuring myself, all of that intensity trickles over and everybody else has to deal with it. You know, if you have anyone in your life, and I pray that each of you do, if we're not good to ourselves, then we end up circulating that around. Good things and good energy are contagious. So let's talk about some of the plans we can take to find balance in our life. The first one is building your self-esteem. Learning to love yourself. Now, self-love is a very long journey, and it does take time. But whether it's a mantra every day, whether it's journaling, whether it's working with a mental health practitioner or even a coach, just any way to build yourself up, to be able to comfortably be proud of who you are and where you've come from, that you haven't been brought this far to be dropped now. That balance comes from knowing yourself and becoming your own best friend, to be able to be alone with yourself. And at times, we're not always going to love ourselves, but like ourselves enough to get from one step to another. Sounds fluffy, but it's really real. It's about being able to receive and say thank you and not feel like it's, constantly reciprocity, that if I gave, you have to give to me. It's that you could comfortably give and receive. There's this notion of a helper's high. It's about getting involved. When you give to others and you help out, whether it's community service or to your family, because, kindness starts in the home, right? We sometimes can serve our community, but we should really start in the home. We get this helper's high. And there's a lot of research about brain chemistry when we give to others. That's one way to find balance in your life, that it's not only about receiving. Sometimes we are our true selves. We can be a more selfish tendency, can have a little bit of narcissism. We're humans. We've got all the things, right? But when we move outside of some of that and say, I want to give too, even if it feels a little uncomfortable, the high that comes from that is very deep and very profound. Managing stress, which we've talked about extensively, but I will beat it into your minds lovingly as much as I can in these messages, because if you manage your stress, you could find balance. You could feel like that stress doesn't consume you and that you've got a little bit of peace and a little bit of stress. A little stress motivates us, and too much peace makes us too sedentary. So we need an equal balance of both. Think of that scale. There's too much of one and you see that imbalance. But if you kind of level the two out, they both matter. So managing your stress. One thing that I talk and I think about often is figuring out our priorities. And we did talk about this in motivation, is that, if it doesn't become a priority to exercise, it's not going to be one. You make that choice. But figuring out your priorities. Now, I do an analysis of my life, whether it's internal or actually tangible, where I write it down, I graph it. Pros and cons lists. Sometimes I have something that I need to get done by the end of the month. I don't need to get done tomorrow. But setting those priorities, we might enjoy that thing that needs to get done by the end of the month more, so we set it as a priority. But pushing things off create imbalance, makes you feel pressured, makes you feel misaligned. But sometimes just doing the things, just like doing the exercise, even if sometimes you don't want to, you'll feel proud when it's done. There's these cliches, these sayings, these memes we see everywhere of, I hated that workout, said nobody ever. Because when you get it done, it's just a great workout. Any workout that gets done is a good workout. Any workout is more than sitting on a couch. So it's about finding and figuring out those priorities, setting them, and setting measurable goals. Getting involved not only in the service sort of way, but in our own lives. Showing up for ourselves. Doing things with friendship and family that matter. Speaking of friendship, is choosing friends that serve us. And I don't mean in the service work. I mean that build us instead of break us. There are so many friendships in my life, I'll personalize this. And this is where the pandemic, while it was very hard and painful, it really helped me. It pared down some of those relationships for me because I got a chance to really look at what matters, right? Sometimes we choose friends and people in our lives because it's glamorous. Certain friendships are exciting, new, unique. But really the friendships that it's a give and take in a healthy way, that you grow, you learn from them, because we always want to remain teachable, that's friendship. So choosing friends create balance. I've had friends many times over the years, and I've been guilty of this too, where kind of, sucked up all the oxygen in the room. Now I'm intense, but I like to give. So I looked at my friendships, and there were a couple friendships in my life where I was always giving, and it was sucking me dry and depleting my energy levels. And that's a priority shift. That's choosing friends that create balance in our lives. Now that we've talked about friends, we've talked about family, we've talked about service work, we've talked about not pouring from an empty cup, managing stress, kind of receiving and giving, developing and building our self-love and our self-esteem. One thing that I think is very important in the pursuit of balance, because balance has many layers, many stages, is also learning how to cope with change. Change comes and goes. Jobs change, people in our lives change, locations change, financial and spiritual situations change. And coping with that change is probably the most challenging thing. And if it's in balance, everything feels out of control. And when we feel out of control, that's when our body starts to feel depleted. We make some negative choices, maybe in how we eat and how we move, and our physical health suffers. But when you feel in control, even if you can't change it, that you're coping, that you're developing coping mechanisms that are not self-medicating or self-harming, God forbid, but you're actually developing healthy coping strategies, talking to somebody that builds you up, going for a walk, taking a deep breath, saying something good to yourself, leaving for 5 minutes, shutting off the noise in your head, counting down. There are so many methods to developing coping skills to manage and navigate change. So in the pursuit of finding balance in your life, I hope that some of the recommendations I've made help you kind of conquer it. We will never fully correct it all. We'll take one step forward and maybe a couple steps back, so is the way of life. But one thing to think about in the pursuit of finding balance is try to avoid, in your developing of that coping, fear-related responses. Now, I always say the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real. I don't always say it. Other people say it too. It's a common acronym. Let me repeat that. False evidence appearing real. We think it's real. It consumes us. It misaligns us. It removes that balance. But if we say that fear is a perception, I could take one step at a time to manage and go through that fear and all that stress and some of those changes and some of those challenges, and I could come out on the other side having learned, having grown, having grew, and getting to a better version of myself. We could laugh at ourselves, or we could cry. Sometimes if we just try and not take ourselves too serious, and that we go through life always attempting to achieve balance, we'll get through the busy times together successfully. Thank you for listening.